So I'm going to do a little video on these documents, these top secret documents that have been going around. I guess what I'm hearing is they've been out for over a month or so, close to a month. They weren't just out since last week. People just started reporting on them last week or were made aware of them. New York Times, I guess, got permission from their handlers in D.C. to actually talk about this, probably because they were already circulating all over the place. I hadn't seen them myself, but I guess it was a big enough of a problem that, somebody in Langley said, okay, they called the editor of New York Times and said, okay, I guess you should talk about them and tell everybody that they show how much penetration we have in Russian military planning. I guess that was their way of making light of it. Both Washington Post and New York Times made it a point to state, without showing me any supporting reasons or not giving me any supporting evidence for it, they state, oh, it shows how much penetration we have into the Russian, the Russian military network and all that. And I haven't seen anything that would indicate that. I mean, documents like this right here, this is one of the documents. It shows, dispositions of troops, of Russian troops. Down here, it shows the KIA numbers. This is mostly stuff, I mean, as far as the troop count, where the troops are at, okay, good, big whoop. They have satellites. So, great. They can look at their satellites. The way the Washington Post and the New York Times kind of try and imply, what they try to imply is that we have penetrated their entire military somehow. That I don't think that's true at all. As a matter of fact, I think the United States has very few actual good assets within, especially from a human intelligence perspective, into the Russian military or intelligence services. Just what I've seen shows me that the United States has few human intelligence assets there. One thing the Russians seem to have done very well at this point is to control the outflow of information of their planning. So on the flip side, it seems like Europeans are very worried about Russian assets and spying operations in their institutions, because they keep having to fly to the United States to have closed door meetings with Biden. They keep having to fly back and forth instead of like Ben Wallace did it earlier last year, and Schultz just did it earlier this year. So that's all nonsense. That's DC. That's Langley telling the news guys, hey, just say this, to make it look like we're really competent. So that's what I think about that. What was the one document people were all pissed off about? Yeah, this one. I didn't see that yet. Let's see, here goes a bunch more of these documents here, I guess. So, this one here shows a KIA. It shows, as of, I think, 1st of March, 17,000 Russian KIA and 71,000 Ukrainian KIA. So this obviously got the crybabies and the copers really upset. So much so that pretty soon after this, doctored photos started to appear online saying that this was the original photo. They were saying that this is a doctored photo, and they started putting out doctored photos. They basically flipped the two figures and made it look like the Russians had 70,000 KIA and the Ukrainians had only whatever KIA. Now, the thing about this is not really this is not news to anybody who's been actually watching the war. And it seems to me like a lot of this information is coming from sources that are already publicly available. And I would expect that the Ukrainian KIA numbers are coming from I would suspect those are coming from Ukraine, which means that I bet those are actually much higher. In other words, I bet the Ukrainian KIA is probably closer to 100,000 at this point, if not more. And remember, KIA means killed in action. That means your total casualties. That doesn't include missing in action. And as we know, there was a problem with, commanders not reporting troop deaths earlier last year. Now, who knows if that's been fixed, if that problem's been taken care of. We also know that, Ursula von der Leyen last November let it out that 100,000 Ukrainians were killed. So that was probably the Europeans' honest assessment of the situation at that time. What we're seeing here is probably the Ukrainian estimate, and then what we're seeing here, that could be based on the, I think it was BBC or one of these British news organizations in concert with this open source intelligence, like media something company. They did a investigation using all of the publicly available data, and they came up with a number very similar to that. So if this was doctored, I don't see how. It looks like it's done pretty good, and this is in line with what we already thought. We knew that Ukraine was losing a lot more troops than the Russians. The Russians had been very cautious in this war, really conserving their manpower, while the Ukrainians have been doing the exact opposite. So it's amazing to me that this is what I wanted to get at. I don't want to rant too much in this video, but this is what I wanted to get at. It looks like we have a whole lot of it. I'm on Yandex now. So Yandex, I guess, you can get some better stuff than, you can get better stuff here. So what this really shows me is that if this is the information people are getting at the highest levels, okay, which it seems that this is a very well put together PowerPoint that's very official looking. This is not something that a mid-level analyst would be getting. Okay, this is something that would be going to a general or even maybe a cabinet member. And this is the information that they're getting. So it seems to me like these guys can't even get honest intelligence because the bureaucracy is so politicized and they're so caught up in their own groupthink. And there was somebody, I think Naked Capitalism was talking about this too. Now, in my defense, I was thinking about this days ago. I'm like, wait a minute. So there's nothing really spectacular in here, nothing that we didn't already understand to be the case if we've been keeping track of this war. So it seems like our very decision makers are getting terrible intelligence, probably because, the lower level or the mid-level analysts, they don't want to rock the boat by giving these guys their honest assessment. So they're going to tell the commanders what they want to think. This is what happens when bureaucracies become paralyzed by their own corruption and politicization. I can't even say it. You know what I mean. This is what happens. This is a civil service, okay, the most important one, our intelligence agencies. This shows me that they're essentially non-functional at this point. Okay. So that's where I'm at with it. I would say it's disheartening, but at this point, there's nothing to stop what's going to happen to the United States. But this is just further evidence of the absolute disintegration of the United States. And it's happening this fast because this is what we're giving to our highest level, decision makers. There was one of these... maybe it's on this document somewhere. One of these documents said that Russia had over 90% of its total military committed in Ukraine or committed to Ukraine or in Ukraine. I think it said in Ukraine. So that's just absolutely, it's impossible for that to happen. There's no way that can be the case. If that were the case, then the United States can land do an amphibious assault on the other side of, on the west coast, on the east coast of Russia over there or whatever. It makes no sense that Russia would have 90% of its total military capacity committed to Ukraine. So that was a really bizarre thing, and I guess Ben Wallace repeated that some time back. So what this shows me is just how bad the intelligence is by the time it gets up to the highest levels. And if the intelligence is this bad, then don't expect this war, the tide of this war, to turn anytime soon. The idea, first of all, that they were planning on doing an offensive in April, which I think there was a document somewhere that said they wanted to do the offensive in April. The idea that they would do that is dumb. That's mud season. That's the muddy season in Ukraine. That's when the ground is too soft to really support armored vehicles. So I guess somewhere there's I think it's this document. This document here. This is like this is pretty remarkable. It shows all of the forces being put together and just how intricately involved the United States is. And one of these documents shows that there's a total of 97,000 NATO troops, boots on the ground, that are there in an advisory capacity. There's 97,000 advisors in Ukraine, probably mostly in Western Ukraine. So NATO is already in Ukraine, which is absolutely remarkable. Don't tell me that these advisors couldn't be, repurposed or reassigned to being, on the ground combat troops if necessary. At least probably 10% of them are hardcore special forces types that can fight, So that's pretty remarkable. So what these documents really show to me are a couple things. First of all, it shows to me the lack of really insight the United States has into the Russian military. Got another one here. You see, you used to have all these like little slides here with dispositions of troops, and that was, I guess, Washington Post and New York Times is reason for them saying that we had deep penetration into Russian military networks, and I don't think so. That can be done with signals intelligence, as Alexander Mercurius points out, spy satellites. I mean, these are not capabilities that Russia doesn't also have. Russia has just as much reconnaissance. I mean, I'm sure the United States has the best. We've invested a lot of money on it. I hope we have the best. But I'm sure Russia has comparable capabilities. So it's really quite amazing. So, yeah, there's that whole nonsense. No, this doesn't show. See, this is where this is a little blow up here of the killed in action. This number here, 61 to 71,000 KIA. While this may shock a lot of people who have been watching the media, the mainstream media, this is right in line with like basically low-level estimates of killed in action. I would say the 71,000 is the absolute lowest level for Ukraine, and then over 100,000 would be the high level. And with Russia, I would say between 70,000 and 30,000. But you got a 7-to-1 kill ratio between the Russians and the Ukraine. I mean, between the Russians killing 7 Ukrainians for every 1 Russian. That doesn't surprise anybody. So this is like, wow, this is your deep penetration into Russian intelligence. So that's my first takeaway. The second takeaway I have is that if this is the kind of intelligence that they're getting, this is not honest intelligence. This is dressed up, buffed up intelligence given to somebody way high up, telling them what they want to hear and what they want to see. Well, then, don't expect this war to turn out the way we want it, because we can't even be honest with ourselves. If our intelligence officials can't even be honest with the people up high on conditions actually on the ground for fear of rocking the boat, which is probably the case, then this is going to continue to be a shit show. And it's just gonna shit show along. And then the third one is the biggest speculation is who did this? Obviously, everybody wants to know that and why. And I'm just gonna go out on a limb because who am I? I'm just a boiler mechanic with 20 subscribers, and I'm gonna say I think it was someone in Mark Milley's staff, or Mike Milley, Mark Milley, whoever that weirdo is, the guy they used to call the woke general. Although, back in the day, he used to talk a lot of sense, Mark Milley. He used to talk a lot of sense about China. You can find a video of him saying that, we don't need to be antagonizing China. That goes back to like 2014. So Mark Milley, probably, he's craven, and, he's a sellout. But, his opinion, in his opinions and his analysis are probably actually pretty good, but the problem is he won't stand up for his opinions or analysis. He's a yes man. He's craven, so he's just going to do whatever he thinks is necessary to keep his job and keep his reputation. So, but he did earlier last year or late last year, I think, make a comment that ruffled a lot of feathers about. Basically implying the war wasn't going well. He had to come back out later on and rescind those comments. But it wouldn't surprise me if someone on his staff, with his consent, did this in order to maybe scuttle this planned spring offensive. I guess another takeaway, by the way, which goes along with this, is that apparently. According to what we see in these documents and then comments from anonymous officials to the New York Times, probably an intel official, the intel official basically admitted that all of these documents, that Ukraine wouldn't have had access to these documents, which means that the planning, because a lot of these documents were planning documents, so it means that the planning for the spring offensive was being done exclusively in Washington, D.C. In other words, Ukraine is not in charge of this war. It's Washington, D.C. that's in charge of this war. So now those of us who most of us who have been watching this war already knew that, but now we have a little more proof of that. So because of that, someone, I guess, finally, had a set of balls enough and a conscience enough to say, well, I don't think it's right that we're going to push all these poor young men into what's going to be a disaster of counteroffensive for PR's sake, for the purposes of the camera, because that's what this spring offensive is all about. It's all about PR. It's all about politics. These are political decisions being made, and the military is going along with it. And someone within the DoD, because the DoD has been kind of like, over the course of this war, they've been. There's been a lot of dissent within the DoD, and someone somewhere said, enough is enough. We have to do what we can to stop this, or else a lot of people are going to die, mostly Ukrainians. We just can't let them do this. And so for now, it seems that they've scuttled the plans of the sociopaths in the Capitol building and in the White House and in Kiev. Okay, so thankfully they did that because, it's absolutely ridiculous that, this is the same thing happened last year in Kherson. The United States, because it was the midterm elections, people in D.C. pushed the Ukrainians to do these offensives in Kherson and Kharkiv, and the losses were horrendous. And the Russians, they just did a strategic withdrawal, especially in Kherson, one of the most well-executed strategic withdrawals I've ever seen, and a very effective tactical psyops campaign also. And they lost virtually no troops when they withdrew from Kherson, and the Ukrainians lost, by all accounts, I think I've heard 10,000, 15,000, something like that. And then the Kharkiv offensive was more of the same. So those are my three takeaways right there. it's pretty crazy just how bad this intelligence is, just how politically motivated it is. There's these little snippets over here about, these little snide comments about Russia. Like, these people can't state facts for the life of them. They're too caught up in their own propaganda. And this happens. This happens all the time, especially in places like D.C., which are very isolated from the rest of the world. These people live in this bubble within the Beltway, and they lose touch with reality, and it appears from these documents that they indeed have. So that's my take on it. I am out.